There are some good rules of thumb out there, but they're meant really to just get started. Let's dive into our questions now this week. Annette via text is up first. My husband is going to receive a pension from being a teacher. We are currently investing about 17% of my income. Is that enough, or do we need to invest more? Annette, thanks very much. And this is a little bit of a dichotomy when you think about retirement. People who have access to a pension, they can be very focused on that being enough. But Annette is wondering if it is going to be enough, and they're doing something additional, putting away 17% of her income. I would encourage you, Annette, to begin with the end in mind. Rather than focus on what you're doing now, we need to first think about what you're trying to accomplish later. And I think that's the mindset shift that has to occur here, John. And it really begins with when Annette and her husband plan to retire and how much income they're going to need and want.
Yeah, absolutely. And we bifurcate or divide income to talk about required income or basic living expenses, those things that you're going to pay every month regardless of what may be going on. Those basic required expenses have got to be met with very predictable income. Pension is a very predictable income source. Social Security is a very predictable income source. So for Annette and her husband, I would say sit down, take a calculation of what that pension amount is going to be. Be sure to take into consideration whether you're looking at a life-only pension for your husband or you're looking at a joint survivor pension for your husband, and understand what the differences between those are for both your current income and your future income if your husband should predecease you. But you got to get that picture in mind. Then add in your Social Security, what you anticipate to come from your Social Security checks, and that will give you a dollar amount that you will be able to provide for basic living expenses. Now, that may or may not be enough. No one sits around and goes, oh, we're going to give them Social Security and this pension so they can cover their basic living expenses. It's just a calculation that's done in a vacuum. You have got to meet those living expenses, and you've got to determine what those living expenses are. So you've got to go through that calculation of understanding what your need is on basic living expenses. Then if you need to supplement that income that would meet those basic living expenses, you may want to take some money from that 17% accumulation bucket that you've got going on right now and add to a regular, predictable, dependable income stream that meets those basic living expenses. And then from there, Scott, it's really very discretionary.
Yeah. And so obviously, if your husband is going to have a pension, that is not likely to be anywhere near even 100% of his income. So you can obviously realize it's going to be much less of the household income. So you are going to need other resources, and you are investing 17%, and that's great. I think that, when we get into this percentage, this contribution rate as a percentage of your income, and one of the things she doesn't say is is a 17, she does say her income, 17% of her income. There are some good rules of thumb out there, but they're meant really to just get started. A lot of people say 10 to 15%. If you're not saving anything and you hear I need to be saving 10 to 15% and you start doing that, that's a good thing. But in terms of what your personal contribution rate should be, depends on a few things. And we've already talked about the major one, John. It's income, because if you have a lot of guaranteed income, you may not need to save as much as someone else who doesn't. But the other thing is we don't even know how old this couple is. So if they're behind, her contribution rate may need to be larger.
Yeah, I think this is kind of, to coin a phrase, this is the difference between being generally right and precisely wrong.
Right.
Exactly. You can really narrow this down and get very specific. And I think that's what you need to do as you're going into retirement, because we have seen situations where people did not do the due diligence on this, and they came back going, we're really not able to make it. Can we do something else? And so to prevent that and prevent you from making some commitments that can't be changed down the road, then you really do need to pay attention to this mathematics problem that presents itself.
Yeah. So I would encourage Annette and her husband to go through the planning process. The Gen Wealth Ready to Retire process will work you through where you're going to end up based on what you're currently doing now. And that asset level can translate into a defined monthly income for you with raises throughout retirement. And then you can determine if that looks good, if you're on track or you're not. And then we can determine whether you need to increase your savings rate or not. And I would also, to finish up this question, be careful about thinking of your retirement as his and hers. My husband's got a pension, so we're going to save my paycheck. That can cause you to silo your thinking in terms of where you're saving. Now, it's probably likely that if your husband's a teacher and he has access to an additional employer plan, a defined contribution plan like a 403B or a 457, there may not be a match with that. But if there is a situation where your husband has a bigger match that he's leaving on the table because he's not contributing to that retirement plan because he's good, he has a pension, and all of the funds are going to the spouse's plan and the match is not as good or non-existent, then you're leaving money on the table. So comparing retirement plans here matters, John. And I also think about the husband having access to a 457, which is different than a 401k. So there may be an opportunity to have money earlier that way.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunities out there. I think, Scott, the important thing is you plan. You have got to sit down with someone who can guide you through this process and help you to arrive in a safe place as far as retirement is concerned, where you've got your basic needs covered and you've got some discretionary income, because everybody's going to want to do something more than just cover their basic needs in retirement. That's a very critical, and I would say that's a very big attaboy to this family, because they have been saving over and above the pension contributions that are going in on teacher retirement. And oftentimes people just go, well, that's my retirement. That I'm taken care of.
Yeah.
Not necessarily so.